but for those of you who maybe don't know me, my name is Christine Pinto. I am the Director for Faith Formation for the Diocese of St. Cloud. We are going to do a kind of a learning session on the new OCIA. I do plan to take a break about halfway through, a little bit over half, assuming that we are on schedule. And I don't have a ton of people with questions and those kinds of things. So feel free to speak up. I can't see you. So if you have a question as we're going through, feel free to speak up. Otherwise, I will take questions at the end of the presentation as well. So if you are thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not going to remember it, you might want to write it down and then we can catch it at the end as well. All right, so for those of you who do know me, this is not my normal voice. I'm fighting a cold. And so if you hear dogs whining in the background, it would be my puppies who are not happy that they are outside the office and I am inside. So we'll just ignore them if they come through on the microphone as well. So here we go. So the Order of Christian Initiation of Adults, what came out in November. The official start time for it was started earlier this month in December. And then you can, of course, start doing it. You can hold for a little while and wait until Ash Wednesday. But by Ash Wednesday, we need to be using the new rite books for all of the rites going forward, or the new rites that are in the new book. So I thought I would put on the presentation just some of the sources where I got a lot of this information from. And you might be able to find some of this online on your own, but just to know that this isn't my own knowledge per se, but certainly has come from some very wise sources. I'll put this again at the end with some of the resources and some continued formation opportunities going forward. So just wanted to give you an opportunity to see that this isn't necessarily all of my expertise, but certainly coming from lots of good experts in the field. So the first question, or the first two questions that I wanted to pose, there's the same two questions that Amy McKinty posed in her webinar back in November. And those two questions are, what do you desire for those seeking initiation into the church? And what do you desire for the church who will welcome them? And what I appreciated about these two questions was it's kind of a reframing, right? It's a rephrasing because what we're doing in the new OCIA, the new Order for Christian, or of Christian Initiation of Adults, is really not going to be majorly different than the previous RCIA, right? But the reality is this is the time that we can take to relook at what is the heart of the church's initiation process, to look at renewing and re-energizing, reigniting that fire of the church's vision of evangelization and accompaniment, leading to initiation. And we know from even the previous rite and the new directory for catechesis, it says we're supposed to use the baptismal catechumenate as kind of the formation process for all of our faith formation. And so this is an opportunity to kind of reconnect ourselves with what is the church asking us to do when it comes to initiation of adults. And by adults, I mean anybody over the age of 7, right? The age of reason. But that all of those things are contained in the church's vision for initiation, both specifically in our diocese as a pastoral staff and in our ACCs. We are focused on bringing renewal to the church. We know that there is going to be some things that we're going to be working with ACCs over the course of the next how many years. And so this is just one more tool that we have to kind of reimagine, what do ACCs look like? What does a parish look like? How do we work together and bring our people forward in the process of evangelization, catechesis, and initiation. We ultimately want to bring people to encounter the love of Christ, to encounter the beauty of the church, and to encounter the community that is gathered as church every weekend, right? Or in those times that we gather. We, of course, experience Jesus in the Word, in community brought to life in the liturgy and in our apostolic life. When we go out to those margins to do the outreach of those people that have been pushed to the margins of our society. So ultimately, the OCIA, this new process, is outlining how our parish or parishes or ACC diocese is meant to work. And the great thing about that is that this is now the time. So, of course, I'm guessing that some of you are on this recording or on this webinar thinking about what's new. Like, I just want to know what's changing. What do I need to be aware of? So I'm going to go through some of those things first and then kind of talk about some of the different initiatives that even our diocese, things are changing in our diocese that maybe haven't been following the right quite as closely and are going to be following it closer now as we move forward. So first, of course, the title, ordo or order, is meaning multiple rites. So the previous said rite of initiation, of Christian initiation for adults. The reality is it was multiple rites, and so the church has come out and said we're going to change the title so that it reflects that it's an order of rites. It's not just one rite. It's communicating that the process is a gradual thing. It's going to take time, and it's not one rite but multiple, right? So even the Spanish title changed, although the acronym stays the same for RICA or RICA in Spanish. But it is moving from rite to ritual, which means, or in Spanish would mean multiple rites in that process of ritual. The new introductions, there's going to be some new introductions with the combined rites specifically. So for those of you who maybe are thinking, look, we might have one catechumen and we have a couple of candidates on a regular basis, some that have been baptized, some that haven't been. If you can remember back to the last time that you did an Easter Vigil with both groups present, and think about where the assembly was at in the process of initiation. What oftentimes happens is there doesn't seem to be a huge distinction between the catechumens and, or at that time, the elect, right? Because they've gone through the rite of election with the bishop and the candidates. Unfortunately, partially because some of the rites seem very similar. So what the church has done is said, we're going to put some new introductions in the combined rites section of the book so that we have an opportunity to say, okay, this is the group of people that we're talking to right now. Now we're talking to this group of people, and that they are very different. One of the efforts in this new version is to really be intentional about defining the differences between somebody who is unbaptized and somebody who is baptized. So they're written in. Now, you might have a great pastor who's already created those introductions kind of off the cuff in the midst of the Easter Vigil or in the midst of some of those combined rites that you've done. The great news is if you have a pastor who doesn't maybe do off the cuff super well, they're written now in that combined rites section, which is towards the end of the ritual book. So they don't have to try to come up with it off the top of their head. Excuse me. So another new thing is the infant baptisms can now take place at the Easter Vigil. Previously, it was really reserved for adult baptisms, but maybe you don't have any catechumens coming into the church at the Easter Vigil, and so you still want to celebrate the Easter sacraments of baptism, and so. That is an option. Of course, they would recommend that parents bring up the gifts during that time in the Mass. And then the paragraph numbers, while they stay the same, which is wonderful. So if you have an old version and a new version, you're going to be able to compare the same paragraph numbers on both sides. The great thing about that is if you're wondering if anything has changed, in particular with the rights, you can look side by side. Okay, 67A, 67A. Yep, they changed a couple of words here. The only difference is part two, the chapters 2 through 6 are just numbered different. So the paragraphs within those chapters are still numbered the same, but the chapters themselves are numbered a little bit differently. So just keep that in mind. I think probably the one of the biggest changes with this new rite or order is looking at the updated language around the rites themselves. So when we look at that, what the church has been trying to do kind of over the course of the last 10, 15 years is update those rites that flow from the new Roman Missal. And so we're looking at that translation that came out for us, specifically in the United States in 2011. We did a big push, right, in 2010, kind of teaching people the new words of consubstantiation instead of one in being with the Father when it came to the Creed. So they're now updating all of these different kind of rights in the RCIA, or excuse me, the OCIA, as well as they've over the course of the last few years have updated confirmation, baptism, matrimony. So this is just one more in the series, right? The Spanish edition, for those of you who maybe have bilingual communities, that was last updated in Spanish from Spain in 1991. It is being updated, the language again, now with this new one to reflect the English changes that were happening in the English tradition, or in the English edition. But it is a direct translation from the Latin, so they're not going, I know sometimes the church chooses to go through from Latin to English and then to Spanish. So we're going to get a much truer translation of the actual Spanish version when you go directly from Latin to Spanish. It's also Spanish is also closer to Latin. Its roots are also closer to Latin as well. The bilingual edition, if you are in a community that has needs for that, the bilingual ritual book will have English on one side and Spanish on the other. So those pages will be facing, so even if you're not bilingual, you can read through and tell exactly where you are at in the rite, which will be super helpful. The study edition, so that's what I have. The study edition does not have a bilingual version, but you can get the study edition in both Spanish and English as separate books. So just that ritual version that like the priest would have, even for those priests that maybe can say the Mass in Spanish, but maybe aren't completely fluent, it'll be great for them to know kind of where they're at throughout the course of the rite as well. So just an example of the change in language. If you look at the new on the left side of of the screen and the old on the right side, you can see the change really, there's not major change to the language, right? God enlightens instead of God gives light. Um, you know, the he manifests his invisible attributes instead of he reveals himself. So not major changes, but if you look above, you'll see that the numbers stayed the same as I said before, but above you've got your initial commitment. This is for the right for entrance into the catechumenate. So only those people who are not baptized go through this rite. You'll see under the new order, it says initial commitment. The old one said candidates' first acceptance of the gospel. So, what the new rite is trying to do is very clearly distinguish between the unbaptized and the baptized. We no longer use the name candidate for anybody who is unbaptized ever. All right, so the only time we use the word candidate is if it's somebody who's been baptized, validly baptized in another denomination or in the Catholic Church. And so as we look at even just this right for entrance, when it comes to the catechumenate, you're now talking initial commitment from those inquirers as a passage rite or a rite of passage then into after we've gone through the rite of for entrance, we then go into the period of the catechumenate. For those that are candidates who have been baptized, they have what's called the rite of welcome, which can be done. There is a section in the study guide that they can be done in a combined rite, but they are, or a combined set of rights, but they are still two separate individual things. You don't send candidates through the right for entrance, they would be the right of welcome. So I think in order to kind of explain maybe a little bit further around language and kind of what those different titles are, I want to take a look at kind of each stage of the baptismal catechumenate. So we're going to set aside those candidates, those people who have been baptized, and look solely at those who are not baptized. So when we look at inquirers, those are the people that are coming to us or we're creating a relationship with them, some pre-evangelization, some pre-catechumenate. They're just coming and wondering about joining the Catholic Church or getting in touch with faith. And so they are they're in that period for as long as it takes for them to feel like they are ready to, and you in the discernment process, to move them then into the rite for entrance into the catechumenate, which then moves them into the period of the catechumenate. So there's not a predetermined, we're going to do 4 sessions of inquiry and then we're going to move to this. This is really based on where is the individual person at and how do we move them through this process based on their own life situations, right? So then you're moving on to the catechumenate period. This is where the person is now called a catechumen. They're no longer called an inquirer. This is where the people come together to learn about the faith. They're doing some breaking open the word. They're being dismissed from the liturgy after the liturgy of the word to break open that word farther and learn more about how God is at work in their lives. There's, of course, some optional rites in there, the celebrations of the Word of God, some minor exorcisms. There's a sending, a rite of sending that you can do in your parish or in your ACC prior to them going to then the cathedral with the bishop. What is it, the first Sunday of Lent. And then at that point, once they've gone to the rite of election, and the enrollment of names happens in the book of the elect there. That's the point then that they now become elect. So we move them through, we don't call them inquirers when they're in the catechumenate stage. We don't call them elect until after they've gone through that rite of election. The period then of the purification and enlightenment happens then usually takes place during Lent. It's kind of that process that dates back to the early church, right? That purification of the interior. We don't need to spend time during this time cramming their head full of knowledge. This is about the interior conversion and converting ourselves more and more to follow in the footsteps of Christ. Within this period of the elect, we have 3 scrutinies on the third, fourth, and fifth Sundays of Lent. In between, we have the handing on of the creed, which happens after the first scrutiny and before the second, so should happen at like a liturgy of the word or at a mass during the week between the third and fourth weeks of Lent, and then the handing on of the Lord's Prayer that happens following the fifth Sunday of Lent, which also should be taking place at a mass during the week prior to the sixth Sunday in Lent. Then, of course, after we get through that period of purification and enlightenment, you've got the celebration of the sacraments of initiation, baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. Once they've received their sacraments at the Easter Vigil, then they are called neophytes, meaning new plants. That period of mystagogy then that follows the neophyte through the course of an entire year. So when when catechumens or inquirers, ask, well, how long is this going to take? We're talking about at least a year to 2 years of process for them to be able to look back over their experience and look forward to becoming more formed in their faith, right? The reality is our faith journey is a lifelong journey. And as many of you know, I would hope all of you know, what you learned when you were confirmed, your training, your learning, your growth, your faith didn't stop there. It continues to grow as we go forward. And so we need to kind of look at changing the language that we use around this is how long this period is going to take, and then you're going to move into this period, because not everybody's lives are necessarily that neat and simple, as many of you know if you've done OCIA or RCIA in the past, right? That you have kind of people coming at you from all different walks of life and life experiences. But just to remember that we should be doing mystagogy throughout the course of the next year. And in this whole process, it's not you that does everything. It's not even just your team that does everything, right? This is supposed to be done as a parish community. And so as you have people move through these different processes, you have an opportunity to bring in different people from your parish who can walk with inquirers or catechumens or elect or neophytes, so that it doesn't have to be you at all times, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for the rest of your entire life, right? But there was a conference this last summer, the National Gathering on Christian initiation in Chicago, and they were talking about how do we create communities of evangelizers to then be able to evangelize the evangelizers who will go out and evangelize the people, right? Something has brought those inquirers to the church, or some experience, some place in their own lives have brought them to the church asking for this sacrament. All right, so let's set aside those that are unbaptized and to look just for a couple of minutes at the people that are already baptized and are choosing to either become Catholic through full communion, or maybe they have always been Catholic and just didn't finish sacraments with kind of the rest of the class, right? In that process. So, as I said before, what we call them matters. So these are the only people that we call candidates. They are seeking full communion, and we've got the right of welcoming. So for the catechumens, or excuse me, for the inquirers, we have the right for entrance. Here we've got the right of welcoming. Can be similar, but still different. We've got a right of sending if they were to be sent to the cathedral to do a call to continuing conversion with the bishop. I don't know that that is happening um anymore, but if that were the case, right, there are those rights there. There's also the penitential rights and scrutinies. If they have been baptized, they also go through reconciliation prior to receiving their sacraments of Eucharist, of confirmation and Eucharist, and a rite of reception, which is actually that initiation process in the parishes, in your parish. Um, and that rite of reception can happen at any time of the year, not solely um, at the Easter Vigil, when candidates are ready, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. That is when they come into the church. We don't need to wait for them, or wait for catechumens to be able to do the catechumens and the candidates together. So the other change, maybe which is going to be difficult not only for us, but also for those who have chosen to become Catholic as adults, is this idea of convert. So the new order has said the only time we use the word convert is if they're converting from a non-Christian faith. So our Muslim brothers and sisters, Hindus, Jewish, anybody who's converting from a non-Christian faith are now called converts. Everybody else are called candidates. And I know I've heard candidates who have become Catholic who then call themselves converts. But the reality is what do we call people who were baptized Lutheran and received their final sacraments in the Catholic Church of Eucharist and confirmation? Those are called Catholics. We don't call them converts. So just something to keep in mind. Like I said, I know I've heard people themselves, saying, "Hey, I'm a convert." Actually, unless you were Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or atheist, you're not. So, excuse me, something to keep in mind. All right, so just to kind of reemphasize that clarity between the baptized and unbaptized, paragraph number 477, which is towards the end of the book, in and amidst the combined rites section, says, for the reception of those already baptized into the full communion of the Catholic Church, both the doctrinal and spiritual preparation of the candidate is required, according to pastoral needs accommodated to individual cases. A candidate should learn to adhere more and more lovingly to the church in which the candidate will find fullness of his or her baptism. At the end, then, of paragraph 477, it specifically reiterates equating candidates with catechumens is to be altogether avoided. So what does this mean if you are coming from perhaps a small parish that only has 1 and 1, right? Does this mean I have to do 2 totally separate processes and 2 totally separate programming? No. But even if you have 1 session for both your catechumens and your candidates, it must be clear throughout the process that those who have been baptized are growing in strength and grace that they've already received in the sacrament of baptism, and they're not the same as the unbaptized. So, as we look at that, what does this mean on a practical level? It means that when you do a dismissal from Mass, you don't dismiss everybody. Even though the candidates maybe have had some formation with the catechumens, those catechumens are the only ones that leave. The candidates stay throughout the course of Mass, and then when it's time at the end of Mass, if you want to pick them up with the catechumens, you can certainly do that. But the candidates don't get dismissed from Mass as the catechumens do. Why is this important? Why am I emphasizing this, and why does the OCIA emphasize this? There's two real reasons, Amy McKinty would say. One, of course, is an ecumenical reason. Their baptisms are valid, and if we start treating them like they haven't been baptized, that causes some conflict between our Christian denominations, which we don't need to create any more conflict, right? But there's also a theological reason. We believe that those that have been baptized already have the fullness of baptism. And so, as I said before, they're growing in strength and grace from their sacrament of baptism. And as we help them in that process as candidates, we can we do that in a different way than what we would do for our unbaptized brothers and sisters. Then the next paragraph, 478, says, in all cases, however, discernment should be made regarding the length of catechetical formation required for each individual candidate for reception into the full communion of the Catholic Church. So what this is saying is when we're looking at candidates, we're not looking at, okay, you're starting in September, you're done at the Easter Vigil. We're looking at them on an individual basis. And as an example, you're looking at somebody who's gone to church with their spouse for years and has been part of the community. They don't need the same kind of preparation as somebody who maybe was even baptized Catholic, but never had any formation around that. So this is a discernment process between you and the person, and it's an ongoing discernment process, right? So we're going to use different titles and terms to help distinguish where people are at in the process. Certainly, when we look at catechumens, or inquirers or elect or neophytes who have not been baptized, those separate terms are super helpful to indicate kind of where they're at in the process. And as they're moving through it, they don't all move together as a group. They move together individually based on where they are at in the process. And there are a few reasons for that, right? So the needs of the catechumens, like I've said, is different from those of the candidates and even from individual people. I know in the past we've had people in parishes who said, look, I really want to become Catholic, but I can't make any of those meetings. Well, okay, they're at a different maybe stage in their faith than somebody who is on fire to learn more about their faith and wants to participate in every single session that you could possibly have, right? There are also things like, are they out um, in the community doing works of charity and works of service, that you can help them to see that that's part of formation as well. Certainly, if they're baptized in another Christian religion, they do not need to wait till the Easter Vigil. I've said that multiple times. Those combined rites have been revised to help us distinguish with some of those introductory paragraphs that priests can read, or clergy can read, as well as just some of the language within the rites themselves. And candidates should be consulted. This is what it specifically says in the right that they should be consulted about what form and when and how they want to come into the church specific to their needs. So when we're looking at um, maybe you've got a child who is a fourth grader who wants to complete their sacraments, or maybe they haven't received baptism, but for whatever reason they go to the Catholic school and now they want to be baptized and receive their sacraments. You may not put that individual in front of an entire parish community and make them participate in the rites in that way. There are some adaptations for the rights with children when it comes to some language stuff and some just situational things. You know, if you've got a 9-year-old who has to stand up in front of the entire parish, that some are fine with that, and some that might be a little more traumatizing than helpful in the process, right? And we'll talk about that when I get to the children's section. But just to remember that there is no one size fits all. And I know that that's kind of been, for some of us, kind of the way that we've run our CIA in the past, but we really want to get back to the heart of the OCIA and really accompanying the individual on their faith journey. And we can still do that as a community, but that might look differently than what we've done in the past. So we're going to do the national statutes, and then I'm going to give you a break just for a few minutes to kind of take a breather before I go on to the final portion of the slides or of the presentation, and then can answer any questions. So excuse me. So there's a couple of things to know. The national statutes, which came out in the 80s, I believe, 88 or something like that, they no longer are valid. The new national statutes came out on December 1, or I should say they came out in November, but it took effect on December 1. So now there are some new things that actually, whether you choose to use the new rights for your parish right now or your ACC right now, these things, regardless, are taking place now, and you need to be aware of them. So first and foremost is the obligations of those in the catechumenate. Under Norm 8, it says that they are to purify their motivation for baptism, live an upright life, witness to their conversion to Christ, seek to grow in knowledge and assent to the teachings of the church, participate in the liturgy of the word, preferably on Sundays and holy days with the community if possible. So this is we come to Mass, we participate through the homily, and then the priest does the rite of dismissal for them to go and break open the word further with their catechist or with a team member or team members. They should be dismissed from the liturgy after the homily, but before the creed, because remember, they haven't received the creed in the handing on the creed until the period of purification and enlightenment in Lent. And so that's according to Norm 10. They should be dismissed. Whoops, sorry. The rights then of of those in the catechumenate, they participate in the apostolic and charitable works of the church. They take advantage of opportunities given to Catholic parents that that have enrolled their children in Catholic schools. So if there's a discount, and I am not Catholic, but I have now become a catechumen. My family now, by the rules of the church, could receive that discount. They also can be buried in a Catholic cemetery at that point, even if they haven't officially received their sacraments, even if they are unbaptized, if they made it into the period of the catechumenate, they do have those three rights that they can, and those three obligations then that they can take advantage of and must live up to as well. So this is why when we look at the right for entrance into the catechumenate, it's an important step. They need to be ready to take that step. And we're discerning along the way. This isn't just, okay, it's the first Sunday of Advent and this is when we always do it. But that this is something that gets discerned throughout the course of their process. So also in the national statutes, there's more references to marriage. So for instance, Norm 2 says early in the period of evangelization and pre-catechumenate, we need to discuss any issues that could affect their celebration of the sacraments. What does that mean? Norm 7 says unbaptized persons in irregular marriages can enter the catechumenate but cannot go to celebrate the rite of election and cannot go then from the rite of election into receiving their sacraments until that marriage issue has been cleared up. So Norm 2 is telling you you need to have those that first interview or that first dialogue with them early on in the process so that when it comes time for the period of purification and enlightenment and everybody else is going to receive or going to the cathedral um, to go through the rite of election and they're not able to, that's not a conversation you have to have with them the week before. That's a conversation that you had with them early on, and we're in the process of trying to fix whatever the issue is before they get to that point. Of course, it will hopefully help with any heartache or any looking at them as if they are less than the others, right? But as I said, they can enter that period of catechumenate. They can be in that period for as long as it takes while they kind of fix some of those issues with their marriage. So just a reminder that Norm 5 has some specifics about the those that are in prison and those that maybe are homeless or don't have a parish community. It's really trying to say, look, we understand that the ideal is that everything happens within the parish community. But obviously somebody in prison who wants to receive sacraments aren't going to be able to just get out of prison to come to your OCIA sessions. So what they're trying to say is we can make some accommodations for that, but that we want to, but at the best of our ability, create a community around them in the situations in which they are, so that because the community really is the primary formator for our people going through these processes. It's really the community that is responsible for forming people in faith. And so if we do that totally devoid of community, once they receive their sacraments, then how do we keep them connected to a community who can support them through that next year of neophyte in that period of mystagogy, as well as they grow just as Catholics in their faith throughout their lifetime. Okay, I promise this is the last slide, and then we'll take a break. Just a couple of things about recording in parish registers. So every parish should have a register of catechumens. This is according to Norm 14 and OCIA paragraph number 46. In that register of catechumens goes the name, sponsor, minister, date, and place of their admission, and the date and place of their birth. So these, of course, are people who are unbaptized. But remember, those that are now have gone into the period of the catechumenate have the opportunity to receive rights and responsibilities or obligations according to the national statutes in that period of catechumenate. And so we want to make sure that we've written down information about them. Let's say for some reason I belong to St. Mary's Cathedral in St. Cloud and I move to the Diocese of Duluth and join a parish up there because I've moved with my family and I've gone into the period of the catechumenate. We need to be able to say, okay, where are you at in this process? I say, well, I went through the rite for entrance. I am now a catechumen. And the person in the Duluth Diocese can then call back to St. Mary's Cathedral in St. Cloud and look up, they there can look up that register of catechumens to see, is my name there and is the information there, to then be able to say, okay, yes, this person is part of the process and is moving forward in the process, has already gone through that. So some of it comes from rights and obligations, and some of it comes from, of course, our Catholic Church really tries to keep accurate records going forward. Secondly, the Book of the Elect. Now, this is something new, so pay attention, right? The Book of the Elect, both it will, we will have something at the cathedral for those catechumens that come to the rite of election with the bishop and sign their name. But we are also asking, the bishop is also asking the Office of Faith Formation and Worship for the diocese are asking that you also have a Book of Elect in your parish as well. Why is this? First, Norm 15 says we should have one, and OCI 119 says that as well. But we also recognize that the names that are signed in the Book of the Elect at the cathedral at that rite of election, some of them have beautiful signatures, and I can read what their name is. Most of them are doctor signatures, right? Because we're telling them to sign the book, and I don't know who this is or what their name is. So as we're looking at trying to keep good records, we want to make sure that we have that in both places. We have the one from the last couple of years at the diocese, but as I said, most of the signatures we can't necessarily read. The other piece of that is if for some reason, let's just say we live in Minnesota and there's a snowstorm on the day or on the weekend of the rite of election, and you live in Breckenridge or Wadena, and you're saying, look, we're not going to take the risk of driving down in the midst of a snowstorm to go to the rite of election. You can ask for permission from the bishop because of the extenuating circumstances, and the bishop can give permission to your pastor or one of your priests in the area to do that rite in-house at some other time prior to receiving the sacraments of initiation. When that happens, they of course did not come to the cathedral and sign the book. So we want to make sure that we have record of that in the parish where that happened as well. So, or perhaps maybe not a snowstorm, maybe it's just somebody comes down with COVID or somebody comes down with the flu and can't get to the rite of election at the cathedral. We now have this other book that will also have the information after your clergy have received permission from the bishop for that adaptation. It still is required by the rite for them to come to the rite of election, if at all possible, right? So it's not like, oh, I just don't really want to go because it seems like it's really far to drive. That's not a valid excuse, right, according to the right. But what they are saying is, look, we also understand that this happens, and so we want to keep in mind that we have records in both places. Lastly, that register of those received into full communion, the norm 16 of the national statutes, and that OCIA paragraph 486 says the name, parent, sponsor, minister, date, place of reception, and date and place of birth should be put into the register of those received into full communion. Of course, their baptism should also be put in there as well, right? But when it comes to the reception for them, that should also go there as well. So if they're married, their spouse, the date and place of the marriage should also be noted there, and any future marriages are to be noted there. So this register of those received into full communion really is kind of the baptismal registry for those that have already been baptized, but we need a place to put kind of all of their sacraments as we would for somebody who is receiving their sacraments of initiation in our parish through the through the book of baptism, right? The baptismal registry. Now, that being said, if you have that in your parish, I would guess that most of you do not. If you have that in your parish, keep using it, right? That's what the rite would, or the order would say. But the bishop also recognizes that not everybody has that book, and for many years we've put the information for the candidates who are receiving full communion, right? Those baptized people that are receiving their sacraments. We've put that into the baptismal registry, in which case, if that's been your tradition, go ahead and keep doing that. The Pagella, no, I'm sorry, not the Pagella. Bishop came out with something mid-November, early December, something like that, specifically about this. So the Book of the Elect is new. So if you don't have that in your parishes, you should order one of those now so that you can be ready for that when the rite of rite of election happens in March. But I would guess most parishes already have a register of catechumens, and if not, the register of those received into full communion, the baptismal registry, to go ahead and enter that for the candidates. So what about children over the age of 7? We've had a lot of these questions this fall, especially because of perhaps families with kids enrolled in Catholic schools. So according to the church, we know that they consider them adults, anybody over the age of reason, which is 7. So they should follow the same process with as adults, with some adaptations. So earlier in our conversation, I gave you one of those adaptations, meaning, if they're gonna have to stand up in front of everybody for the right for entrance, and they're a 9-year-old and they don't want to stand up in front of the whole church, you can bring them together with a community. You don't want to do this as an individual, but with a community of people that maybe they know, and do the rite that way. A smaller group that represents the larger group. And then the role of the parents, of course, in the process is going to be different than if they were an adult, right? If I'm coming into the church, my mom doesn't have to bring me to church. She doesn't have to talk about faith at home because I don't live with her anymore, right? But if it's a child, the role of the parents really become vital in their faith formation process. And we've talked about this when it comes to faith formation and the vital role of parents having those faith conversations at home. So I get very concerned when I hear, well, we've got a student in a Catholic school who maybe goes to religion class every day and participates as much as they can in Mass once a week, that is the formation to become Catholic or to receive their sacraments. Because so much of a child's formation happens within the home when you talk about tying shoes and vegetables they need to eat and brushing their teeth and all of those different things, that when we totally divorce it from the role of the parents, then we start to have some issues, right? So I would argue that yes, they should be participating in formation in their school, but that is a class and a subject I get graded on. What else are you supplementing with to be able to create a formation process for that child and their individual faith process? I know for myself, when I was in faith formation in the parish, we would have children who were behind on sacraments, and we would put them in with everybody else. And oftentimes they had no idea what we were talking about because they hadn't been formed up to this point. So then at one point we pulled them out and had their own separate class just to do some basic education pieces, some basic formation pieces, how to teach them how to make the sign of the cross, or say the Our Father, pray the Our Father, and some of these basic things that chances are, if they entered the school, they may not have learned in school, and because so many of the kids already knew some of those things that we just take for granted in knowing. So just keep those things in mind as we go forward when we're talking about children over the age of 7. And I will do something at some point in the future around like what might that look like and how might we kind of partner with the school so that parents don't, get super upset about that as well. Because, I'm sending my kids to the school so that they do the formation when we recognize that Catholic school education is super important. I'm a product of Catholic school, but it's also the things that are happening in the home with the parents, those informal conversations that we have around faith that really make the most difference. All right, when it comes to unbaptized children, they should receive all 3 of their sacraments. Those paragraphs 252 to 330 of the OCIA includes all of those different rights that are adapted for children. So as you go forward, there's a whole section in the study guide, right, of the book around this information. Okay, so those who are baptized but uncatechized, maybe they were baptized and then didn't have any formation after that, should receive Eucharist and confirmation at the same time. Those can be found in 400 to 504 of the OCIA, those different rites as well. Now, Norm 17 of the national statute says the bishop can make adaptations. And so before you send me hate mail saying, well, the bishop just had this pagella come out a year ago in December regarding the fact that the priest can make this decision. You are right. He did. The priest can make a decision regarding whether a child receives all of their sacraments at once. That being said, I will point you back to the specific wording that is in the pagella. And it says, when in conscience, the priest is convinced that the delay is for the real spiritual good of the child, to which I had a priest ask me at one of the deanery meetings a couple weeks ago, Well, can you name a time when it would be to the spiritual benefit of a child to not receive the additional graces that come in receiving the sacrament of confirmation at the same time as they receive Eucharist and or baptism? And I I don't know specific instances or situations when that would be the case. That would be something that the bishop or the priest has an opportunity to discuss with you and discuss perhaps with the parents around where is this child at in this process. Essentially, what the bishop is trying to say is, yes, we can make some adaptations to what the OCIA is saying. That being said, it should not be the rule. It should not be, well, I just want this child or these children to just be able to fit in with everybody else and receive their sacraments in 3 or 4 or 5 years when everybody else receives those sacraments of confirmation. And right now we're only going to do Eucharist because that's really not the spirit of the OCIA. If there is a specific family issue or specific issue with the child, that would be to their spiritual benefit, he is okaying that. All right, the bishop's message to the church in the entire order of Christian initiation of adults is to say the catechumenate is a gradual process that can last several years. When we are talking about the catechumenate, these are unbaptized um, adults in the church, right? Anybody over the age of reason, that those people are meant to be in the process for longer than a year. Norm 4, according to the national statute, says ordinarily a person who has entered the catechumenate is to remain in it from at least the Easter time of 1 year until the beginning of Easter time of the next year. Preferably, it should begin before Lent in 1 year and extend until Easter of the following year. So I recognize that some of you might be having a heart attack right now when I say that. What I will say to you now is, for those that are currently catechumens in the process, right? They maybe came in this fall. You told them that they would receive their sacraments at Easter. We are not going to mess with those people that are currently in the process. Those that have not entered the process as of now are asked that yes, they will be in the period of the catechumenate for over a year. So that what the church would say, according to the Directory for Catechesis, is that the catechumenate is the training period in the whole Christian life. That comes from ad gentes. And if we want people to be trained in the Christian life, then we need to give them the experience of the whole Christian life in the liturgical year, right? So we say that the primary formator of people in our parishes is the liturgy, is the Mass. We need to be able to give them the experience of Advent and Christmas and ordinary time and Lent and Easter. Remember, last year, if you started people in September, let's say, because I would guess that most programs or many programs start in the fall. If you started people in the fall, it was less than or a little over 6 months before they received all three of their sacraments of initiation. So what the church is saying, both in the OCIA and what the current bishop is saying is, no, we don't want to rush through this process. We want them to be able to really be formed both by the community and by the liturgical year in this process, so that when they do come to the table, when they do come or to the font, and receive that oil on their forehead, that this is really something that they are understanding, recognizing that our faith is a lifelong process and learning is continual. So the national directory, which is older, right, than the directory for catechesis, which came out in 2020, but this is for the USCCB. They say that we live in or we live the mystery of Christ through the liturgical year, and that representing of that paschal mystery strengthens believers in the Christian life. So what the bishop has specifically, and I just met with him a couple of weeks ago, what he has specifically said is, in special circumstances, the bishop can decide that the catechumenate is less than a year, but it should be the exception and not the rule. And that will be something that you would have to specifically ask permission from the bishop for, because that catechumenate period should be at least a year. So when we look at that, okay, don't have a heart attack, right? But when we look at the formation process and the whole process of the OCIA, this process should be a year-round process. So we don't have to look at somebody who might come to your church door tomorrow and say, I want to become Catholic, and say, well, that's wonderful. I can't really fit you in this year. Come back to me in September. We fit them into the period of inquiry now and create that period of inquiry and that period of catechumenate and that period of purification and enlightenment over the course of the next year plus, right? For receiving the sacraments at the Easter Vigil in 2026. So what I will say, remember, these are only for those who are unbaptized. Those who are candidates are already, you're already supposed to be discerning this process with them throughout the process, so that if you have candidates that are ready now to receive their sacraments, they can go ahead and receive their sacraments. They don't need to be waiting until the Easter Vigil. They don't need to wait. Or if you have candidates now that are coming forward who have been baptized, and you want them to receive their sacraments, you can go ahead and do that when they're ready. That there's not a specific timetable for that, other than the discernment process for you, your pastor, and the candidate as to where they're at. But when it comes to those that are unbaptized, there is this process that the bishop is asking, that the bishops are asking. Our bishop is just reiterating that fact for our diocese now in a way that perhaps previous bishops have not. So I'm going to answer 4 questions, and then I'll answer any questions that you have after that. I know we're a little over time, and so I apologize. If you need to go, that is totally fine. I will put this online as soon as we get it recorded, and whoever has to go through the process of editing, whatever that process looks like. So just 4 questions, because these, I'm guessing, are pretty common questions that you all are going to have. So of course, many of our inquirers probably ask the question, or even candidates, like, hey, how long is this going to take, right? I would argue, the OCIA argues, it's going to take as long as it takes. That the way that we speak about this process shouldn't be about, okay, so here's the calendar, here's the schedule, this is what we're going to do going forward, and when you hit this point on this date, this is what we're going to do. That this is really much more workable with the individual than it is like a regular faith formation program, although the bishops would argue that our faith formation programs should be more like the baptismal catechumenate than perhaps what they are as well. So if you think about, if you know who Father Tim Donovan, the kind of founder of the Pathways Suite that our diocese has been kind of collaborating with a lot, he talks about the sacraments and our understanding of formation as this drive-through model where I am an inquirer. I come up to the window or the menu board, I order what I want, and then I move forward to the next window and receive my sacrament. And that period might take a little while or it might take a long while, but that this is the process and this is exactly how it goes forward, and I know how many cars are in front of me before I'm going to receive the whatever it is. But what happens in that process is then we receive and drive off, and we haven't created this on-ramp of people in formation who are able to then join the community and are part of the community, and we're learning our faith together in that process. So to kind of keep in mind, the way and the language that we use is different and should be different as we move forward. So the length of time is appropriate depending on the grace of God and the various circumstances. Remember, if you've got some issues with marriages or some of those kinds of things, this allows you time to get some of those lined up in this process as well. 76 also says it should last long enough for conversion and faith to mature. And 42, paragraph 42 says, we don't want to hand them a calendar, right? It's about a conversation that we're having, finding out about the individual, what their faith experiences are, where they're at in their faith journey, who is Jesus, what is their understanding of God, do they have a prayer life, and how can we walk with them in this journey? This also means that the period of catechumenate doesn't have to happen every single Wednesday night or every single Tuesday night or whatever it is, or every single week throughout the year. It's maybe an opportunity to say, we're going to take X number of weeks off. We want you to go out and do some service. We want you to go and get involved in the community. Come back and let's talk about, so mystagogia doesn't happen only at the end of the process, but that reflection time happens throughout the process. So we understand not only what I am learning and filling my head with, but also the way that I am moving in my life is how I will grow in my faith and grow as a member of this community. Question 2. Okay, what's next, right? Like, this is for people like me who needs to know, like, here's where I am. I want to know where I'm going. As I said previously, this process is about discerning together. And so as they move through the catechumenal process, as they move through that period of inquiry or through the period of purification and enlightenment, we want to have people around them that are helping them to discern where they're at. Are they ready to move forward in this process, or are they just kind of okay with where they're at right now? Um, Amy McKinty in her webinar talked about the moving sidewalk at the airport. So I think in the past, and I will be the first to say, some of my faith formation programs, confirmation programs, became a moving sidewalk, right? So my students got on, my candidates got on, they stood on the moving sidewalk. It took them to their destination of receiving the sacrament of confirmation, and then they got off and disappeared, rather than providing the moving sidewalk that says this is exactly what this journey is going to look like, and all we need you to do is sit back and be passive recipients of this. We want them to walk those steps together, and we want to walk with them. And like I said, it doesn't have to be just you. It doesn't even have to be just your current team. It might be, who are the people who are the welcomers in the greeters, the people who do really good at outreach in your parish or in your ACC that can be part of an inquiry team, so that when you get new inquirers, they're part of that process, and then slowly we transition them into the period of catechumenate with a different group of people, or with some of the same and some different people, to help them grow along their faith journey. So norms 8 and 9 of the national statutes, we talked about them earlier. They highlight why we don't automatically move people through the process. Remember, there are obligations and responsibilities. So if they're not ready to just keep moving through that process, we want to make sure that we can stop and have those conversations with them throughout the journey. We must communicate differently when it comes to, I think, sacraments in general. And I know there's a group of people that are working on kind of sacramental preparation in general, and advising the bishop around how do we look at sacraments as a whole in our diocese. And that is a slow and yet really fruitful process, I think, that we're kind of going through. But to be thinking about not sacraments as a destination, but as that opening gate to the next steps in our journey. So looking at discerning throughout the catechumenal process, we want to make sure that we're explaining to them along the way what's happening. What are you looking for in order for to be able to say to them, yes, you're ready to move on? If I don't know what I'm supposed to be kind of like working on, how do I know that I can ever achieve what you're asking me to do? So excuse me. So this is an opportunity to have those ongoing conversations around, somebody who's moving into the catechumenate period. This is kind of where they're at in their faith journey, or somebody who's moving into the period of purification and enlightenment really feels like these things they've done and have taken place, and their life is more and more looking like the life of Christ. So make sure that we're sharing these things early and often, because we don't want them to be surprised. And it can prevent painful experiences, especially when we're looking at marriage issues. If it's not this is the process and this is the way the process always looks, but to be able to say, you know what? Not everybody who's currently a catechumen is going to go to the rite of election. So it's not because there's something wrong with my marriage, which can feel very painful and hurtful. And it's not even necessarily their marriage is wrong, but there might have been issues along the way in some other way. But that then it's not okay, this whole group goes and the rest of us all kind of step back and say, okay, well, we weren't good enough to go participate in whatever that next journey is. If it becomes more fluid, it's an opportunity to really accompany people on an individual basis. So to kind of have those conversations about, like, we don't just automatically move people along in this process. All right, so what's the curriculum, right? If you're like me, I would be thinking, oh my gosh, right? My brain is kind of like overloaded now, and please don't feel, I don't want you to feel like your brain is overloaded. We're going to help you in this process. So first and foremost, the curriculum is Christian living, right? Conversion is an essential part of Christian life. And so what are the things that your parish already does that you can have people throughout this process being part of? One of the neatest experiences for me as just a regular parishioner who sang in a choir in my previous parish was to have somebody who was in the catechumenate process also singing in the choir. He loved to sing. He joined the choir when he made the decision to join the church. When he was baptized, we knew him. He knew us, and he kept coming back to this safe community of people because we were his people, right? We were people that knew him, and that he knew. And this community, this parish community, large or small, can be outreaching and evangelizing in many different ways. What are your social justice or your social concerns groups. Maybe you get them involved in those things or in prayer experiences or stations of the cross or um, offering some different opportunities to get them into the life of the parish so that once they receive their sacraments, it's a natural thing to continue to be part of the life of the parish. Maybe it's the festival, the summer festival that somebody takes them under their wing and has them help. You don't have to have a ton of faith knowledge to be able to run bingo. Well, maybe in the Catholic Church, right? Because bingo is kind of a staple for us, right? But to be able to say, you are already a valuable member of our community, even if you haven't gotten every sacrament along the way. Now, of course, those unbaptized can't be lectors proclaiming the word, right? They can't be catechists yet because they haven't grown enough in their own faith, but they certainly can walk alongside people and kind of apprentice in the Christian life in their own way. Let's find the niche that works for the individual. The formation of catechumens is to be comprehensive according to Norm 6, suited to the liturgical year, rooted in scripture, doctrinal and moral life, lived out in service and charity. And so our sessions in January are really going to be looking at how do we form people in the catechumenate period, especially around some of these doctrine things that we can use the basis of the Sunday Gospels, the Sunday readings, and bringing in some of these other experiences, other doctrines that naturally flow in and through that, rather than saying, you're going to come to this class and we're going to teach you everything you need to know about Mary in a 45-minute session or an hour and a half session, and that has nothing to do with the liturgical year as a whole. Catechumenal formation, of course, isn't only about the topic. It can look different depending on different circumstances. You can have formal and informal sessions. We can have things on the knowledge of the faith. We can also have things on just creating that network of people, as I was talking about in the community. The structure of the OCI is intentional, and there's different objectives in each period. So to remember that that first period for inquirers of evangelization and pre-catechumenate, it's just about being open to where faith is leading them, to have those initial conversations and maybe some initial conversions, but not the, okay, yep, I'm all in. If we're looking for, yep, I'm all in, when we first start those conversations, you might find some people who are there, but you may not find everybody is there. Then you've got your period of your catechumenate, because we're looking at the catechesis that's going to lead to practicing faith. And these things can go hand in hand. You don't have to have catechesis. And once you have all of the knowledge, now you practice your faith, right? The reality is when we learn to drive a car, we get some knowledge, we get 30 hours of classroom, right? And then we've watched our parents do it. Then eventually we move into the driver's seat, but our parents or a trusted adult is still next to us, guiding us. It's not for quite a while before we actually take over the running of the of the car all by ourselves. And even then, they don't let other people ride with us for a while, right? Unless it's our siblings. So the period of purification and enlightenment, you're preparing your heart through reflection and penitence, right? It's that interior conversion, which should be happening throughout. But your period of purification and enlightenment really can be a series of retreat experiences or mini retreat experiences over the course of time in that period. And then, of course, that mystagogy is looking back and reflecting on the sacraments, particularly, and how they've influenced our life. But I would argue that mystagogy happens, the more we can do that throughout all of these periods, the better that that experience of mystagogy is going to be afterwards. Oftentimes, it's not until I've reflected on what I've learned that I really have done the most learning. So I can sit at Mass and be filled with the gospel, be filled with the readings, be filled with the homily, and yet how I respond to those things oftentimes doesn't take place until I've thought about them for a while. Last question is who's in charge? And I think it's just to remind ourselves that as much as I like a sequential, like we're moving from point A to point B, and this is how long it's going to take, ultimately God's in charge. And God has been working in these people's lives even before they come to us for these sacraments. And so we want to honor the fact that God is working in their lives, present as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They may not have those words yet. And we want to be able to trust that God is going to continue to work in their lives in and through this process going forward as well. So my job as the OCIA leader is to accompany them while the individual drives the bus, right? While they're saying, this is important to me, and these are the steps I'm going to take moving forward in my faith. I don't need to have all of the answers for them. I need to accompany them in that process. I would argue that's the same thing when it comes to faith formation as well. God is going to work in his people in his time, and this is probably the number one like aggravation for me is I want something sequential and to be able to say this is how long it's going to take. But the reality is God is not linear in that sense. I like to say God draws straight with crooked lines, that my life has taken lots of different paths that have led me to a deeper faith in God and a deeper faith in Jesus Christ. Trusting in the role of the parish and the ACC community. Remember, as I said previously, that community is the primary formator. And so if your community is struggling right now, you're going to want to make sure that you create opportunities for people to be involved in their faith and involved in their community as a community of evangelizers who's going to evangelize them throughout this process. It is not the bishop's role to be the primary formator. According to the OCIA, is actually the parish. And so paragraph 7 talks about the people of God, represented, of course, by those that are the closest to them, their godparents and sponsors and parents and relatives and friends and acquaintances, but also all members of the church and all members of their ACC, all members of the diocese are called to help them grow in their faith and to share those joys that they receive at baptism. I will leave you with this quote from Bishop Stephen Lopez, who is the chairman for the Committee on Divine Worship. And it says, "It is the hope of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops that this new translation will be an occasion for each of us to live more deeply the promises of our own baptism and to dedicate ourselves more intensely to the increase of God's holy people." So my very last thing for you to be thinking about is kind of a 5-point to-do list, right? So we want you to encourage your team and all those that have anything to do with your initiation process in your parishes to really return to the heart of what the OCIA is. What is the heart of initiation? We want you, of course, to update your materials with the new text. Sometimes I forget about that, especially in the midst of kind of a process that's already started. So make sure that you have the most recent information. And as I said, this book will help you a lot as you go forward. I would highly recommend for any coordinators, especially the study edition because it gives you some additional information and breakout around the rites and some general instructions and those kinds of things. Make sure that you read about each period and the ritual before it comes. Don't just assume that it's going to be the same as what it was in the past. I know I have gotten myself into trouble when I don't read things and assume, oh, well, I did this last year, and then realize, oh, whoops, there's something a little bit different, right? Register yourself and your team or other people in your parish, even if you don't have a team. Who are some people in your parish who can come to one of those January sessions that we're going to have kind of throughout the diocese to learn about how do we form and the plan is, we haven't finished the planning process, but the plan is to really give you some experiential opportunities and some hands-on. I can walk out of this meeting feeling like, okay, I have a direction to go when it comes to those that are already in the process. And those that we're going to be picking up some scrutinies and some of those kinds of things as Lent starts this year, as well as planning for those that are entering now for an over 1 year catechumenal process. And then participate in other formation opportunities. So the January sessions, you probably already received the link, but it's just surveymonkey.com/r/OCIA 2020 or 25, excuse me. That is on the event pages as well. If you just go to our calendar, our diocesan calendar in January, there's like 5 sessions, some evenings, some daytime, some Saturdays, some weekdays. You can pick and choose. It'll be the same thing at each one of those. So if you go to one and want to bring a team to another, that's fine as well. And then when it comes to participating in other formation opportunities, there are some 2024 newsletters. The Committee on Divine Worship has them on their website for the USCCB. They're usually 4 to 6 months behind. So you'll see some of the information that I covered today in those that have been put online already. Excuse me. So you can get those for free online as the USCCB puts them out there. You can also get a subscription to the current newsletters. They come out every month. I think July and August maybe are together over the summer, but it's $15 a year to be kind of up to date on all liturgy stuff, if that's something that you choose to participate in. There's also a national gathering on Christian initiation at Loyola University, put on by LTP, Liturgy Training Publications. It's a 2-day event, and the registration is open for that. Currently, they're in early bird registration. It's $250 for the 2-day event. But it's a great opportunity to gather with leaders from around the country that work on initiation processes and have teams, and some of their teams are there to learn more about how to do initiation in your parishes. And then team initiation used to be Team RCIA. They've changed their name since the OCIA has come out. Nick Wagner and Diana McAlintle. Diana was a graduate of the School of Theology at St. John's. They have a website with some team initiation information. You can get a membership, or you can go onto their website and see some of their things, but membership is $35 a month, or if you purchase a year-long membership, it's $360 for the year. If you're not really sure, maybe you just want to check it out for a month, try the $35 membership first. It's got interactive online courses that you can self-pace. There's over 50 training webinars. There's video marathons with a video training series. bite-sized podcast conversations, comprehensive training articles, dismissal reflection questions. So, okay, we dismiss catechumens from Mass. What do I do with them now? They've got those on there as well. And there's some access to members-only guest speaker webinars as well in that process on their teaminitiation.com website, and part of their membership, should you choose that. If you don't have the book, I've given you two different places. One is Liturgical Press, which is, of course, out of Collegeville, or Liturgy Training Publications out of Chicago, has the study guide. If you need to get your manual yet, the national statutes, which are currently in effect, are on the USCCB website, so you can pull those at least from there. But I would suggest sooner rather than later getting your study edition, so you can kind of be maybe one period ahead of where your people are at right now, and be thinking about the new process as new people come in. And then this is the same slide as was at the beginning, just those different places that I had received information from, or webinars to put this information together.